Hello, William, Isabel. Hi. Um, okay. Well, let's do our usual thing while people enter the Zoom. Um, what's new? Anything of importance? Anything that might be relevant to preen theory going on that we're discussing? Mhm. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. Well, Isabel,
Yeah,
let me ask you a question about physics.
yeah. I know nothing, but we can try.
Well, that shouldn't stop you. Uh, right. Um, what would you say a physical object is from a physicist's point of view?
Um, anything that is like governed by like the laws of physics is how I would define it.
Okay, anything that's governed by the laws of physics.
Yeah,
Okay.
nothing should be, going above speed of light.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. So yes, I recall we did ask this question earlier, but I wanted to get a better understanding. For example, what if I tried to say that we live in a three-dimensional space, maybe 11-dimensional if you sort of are a string theorist or something, and that we can define a particular chunk of space with a Hamiltonian. Is that right?
Yeah, Hamiltonian energy. Yeah.
And so you would have this Hamiltonian, and it would sort of describe the amount of energy in that chunk of space, but it would also describe, I guess, uh, where that energy was placed at various points in the space, would it?
Like it could define like Hamiltonian dynamic. So like certain symmetries because of like it has to look like a Hamiltonian matrix. Uh
Yeah.
yeah. So I would say in terms of that, yes.
Okay, yes. So I can sort of buy some of that, but um, can let's say I take two chunks of space which contain what we call matter or
Yeah.
mass energy or something like that. Could they have the exact same Hamiltonian without being the same? That is, could I throw a bunch of hydrogen atoms into a little chunk of space and then also throw some you know some I don't know, corn in another chunk of space of the same size, whatever exactly that means, and they have the same Hamiltonian. Does it uniquely define what's inside of this chunk of space? I mean, I know the Hamiltonian matrix would allow us to uh, calculate the trajectory of that space, how it would change over time, right?
Like I think given a Hamiltonian like a reasonably well-behaved Hamiltonian, I think your solution has to be unique.
Okay. Okay. We'll get back to this. because this is part of what I'm trying to work out on what is a preen really, this thing we started up. It's not necessary at this point, but I think it's important. Uh, oh yeah, and so a couple of remarks. Uh, I have this new way of defining a preen. And I've been trying to get a definition that wasn't just intuitive for a very long time. I wanted to build a mathematical foundation that could be investigated to understand it. And we did talk about the set of all physical things in the universe, whatever that exactly means, and though compared to those that exist. And and I have this new theory, and I want to explore it with you guys. And I asked for people to email me if they were interested, and a number of you were. Right now, I don't think we'll get to it today, but we may get to it soon. I'm thinking that we can discuss it as part of our just lecture meetings, and we'll see what happens.
I think
And
I may have missed that email, but I'll send you an email about it too. I'm interested also. So
okay,
yeah.
I figured you might be.
Yeah.
And so, but maybe we'll do it uh, as part of the class. But one thing is I talk about physical objects, yeah, abstractly, uh, and I can get away with that. But I would rather have a physicist's view of what a physical object is. And uh, a chunk of three space that has a Hamiltonian associated with it, is that what a physical object is? I don't know. But you're in a better position, Isabel, than I am to figure out what I mean. Okay. Or anybody is who understands this stuff. Okay, with that said, let's go to let's start sharing the screen. No, no, stop sharing. Share, share sound. Okay. So we're going to begin. This is everything from now on is going to be from DTD. Okay. So we're going to look at the recent history of preens.
The recent history of preens. The evolution of societies is an important application of preen theory. In what follows, we will look more broadly into the theory. Lenote needs a good segue. It appears that sometime between 4.6 and 3.6 billion years ago, an amazing thing happened on Earth.
By the way, why 4.6 billion years ago? An amazing thing happened on Earth. Why not 4.8 billion years ago or 5.6 billion years ago and say 1.6? Where did I get these numbers from?
Uh, is that when the solar system was formed? And I guess when Earth stopped being just like sort of an amorphous blob of matter?
Or actually a disconnected blob of matter, pieces. I don't know the details of planetary formation, but yes, it's widely considered that 4.6 uh, billion years ago is when the Earth formed. That's the usual number. Okay, anybody know why 3.6 is another number that I chose? Okay, the reason I chose it is I think that's currently thought to be the date at which or that is the date of the oldest, I guess it's fossil record that could be attributed or recognized as possibly, or maybe is by some people, life was there. As I recall, there's a little some kind of fossil artifact that has a collection of like grapes, and they're the size of cells. And, so that might be the evidence, but whatever. Okay, that's why these two
It
dates.
appears that sometime between 4.6 and 3.6 billion years ago, an amazing thing happened on Earth. Molecules arose that could catalyze the raw materials in their environment to create new molecules identical to themselves. These self-replicating molecules would have been engaged in a fascinating struggle for survival.
You know what I mean by a self-replicating molecule, at least in principle, what it might mean. It's a molecule that can catalyze, meaning from its surroundings, cause to form another copy of itself. And all right, and it's widely hypothesized, and I certainly suspect it's true, that such molecules would have arisen before whatever this 3.6-year-old fossil, if indeed it is a fossil of something living, way before those guys started to show up. All right. All right. So if these molecules arose, they'd be involved in a fascinating struggle for survival. Okay.
Their survival would have depended on their ability to compete for resources, reproduce efficiently, and resist degradation. Optimizing with respect to such requirements in a constantly changing environment would have been a daunting task, and it seems likely that the dominant species one moment would be supplanted by another the next. No doubt, after millions of years, the surviving molecular species would have been astonishing things worthy of our admiration. It seems
Okay.
likely that...
All right, so I'm asserting here that replicating molecules would have started to struggle to survive. They'd want to keep, if they kept their copy numbers up, they would be around, right? They wouldn't go extinct. But if they didn't, they would go extinct. And that one self-replicating molecule and another that might arise might be more efficient in creating new molecules than the previous one. Or it might be sort of more resistant to degradation. That is, molecules can tend to fall apart because of thermal agitation and stuff. But some molecules might have been able to be stuck together better, and so they would not be killed as quickly. So how fast they could reproduce and how long they could stay alive to be reproducing would have mattered. And that the first self-replicating molecule might not have been the best one, and others might arise. Okay? Fair enough? All right. So, well, I don't know exactly why this is here. Hang on. Okay. To continue.
It seems likely this world of living molecules would have persisted for many millions of years before nucleic acid-based cells would emerge. Current estimates suggest that by about 3.6 billion years ago such cells did exist, and hence the gene age had dawned. Cellular genes were responsible for building cells, ensuring their survival, and organizing their replication. About 2 billion years ago, cells arose that used ion channels and ion pumps to create electrical potentials across their surfaces. These cells were the predecessors of neurons. By 500 million years ago, creatures existed that had complex collections of neurons, ganglia, in their heads. These primitive proto-brains process sensory inputs, such as light, and induced behavior, such as movement. The development of these protobrains was an important step in a critical process by which genes were surrendering partial control of their organisms to a new type of preen, the meme. Lenote, discuss. About two.
Okay, so discuss. This is, I think, a remarkable event in the history of life on Earth, right? You got these let's see. You got these genes, right? And they start building these brains, proto-brains, if you want. So like dragonflies or something, or maybe even more primitive things. And these proto-brains now are involved in determining what the behavior of these beasts, like a planarian, for example, do when light hits it. That is, the physical behavior of the, let's take planarian, is no longer governed entirely by the genes. It's now governed by a bunch of these neurons that have evolved in such a way that they're now exerting control of the physical behavior as well. Now, why is it remarkable that this would happen at all? Well, this goes back to the selfish preen. Yes? So the genes that are in organisms, as we've said a number of times, are not a team. They're just a collection of aspiring dictators that want to use the organism to accomplish their personal survival, not the organism's survival necessarily, certainly not the other preens it's sharing that organism with. Yes? So here we see what seems to be almost a voluntary surrendering by the genes, some of that control of the organism to these new things, which are mediated by these neurons and this proto-brain made of neurons, and now can control some of the behavior of the organism. All right. But genes are not generous. And that sharing is a surprising thing to me evolutionarily. Okay, catcher.
So I come from, can you hear me? Okay, yeah.
I
I
can,
come
yes.
from more like of a biology background, so this immediately like reminds me of like just symbiosis because I also think of, I don't know if you know, like the more social theory on how brains kind of evolved from like, simpler, more uh, you know, simpler brains to more complex brains. One of them is
Yes.
that, by social interactions and just pretty much like use of the brains, uh, that's how they grew and that's how they evolved, for lack of better terms. So in that way, the preens would benefit the humans, the early humans, and then the preens would benefit because, they have a chassis for their survival.
Yeah, so that's interesting, catcher. And okay, so uh, this is a sort of symbiotic relationship. That is, you would say that the neurons are in symbiosis with the organism or something. That is to say, um, they they contribute to the organism's survival. And so, see, when you have symbiosis, I want to explore this. It's a good idea, catcher. When you have symbiosis, um, what do you have? There's two different creatures with two different gene sets typically.
Mhm.
Okay. And they get together and one provides some goods to the other and vice versa. And of course, these are part of more complicated things. Sometimes it can be parasitic relation, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. But now, so there's the question I have in the setting we've just described is the neurons, who's benefiting from the neurons if they're just symbiotes? That is to say, when we have symbiotes,
Mhm.
uh, right, it goes back to this cui bono. Who benefits? Well, you could say the gene sets of both members benefit, but who's benefiting in this symbiosis? I mean, obviously the genes can gain something from having these neurons, but who's the winner for the neurons? Who benefits?
Well, I was more so thinking of the neuron slash the brain being, because that is like a component of the organism. So
Yes.
if the neurons benefit, then the organism benefits, and then that would be like kind of one side, and then the other side would be the preens that are benefiting because they're able to survive and replicate through these new organisms that have these the semi-consciousness. Um, does that
Well,
make
wait, wait,
sense?
wait, wait. Well, I got lost a little bit on it. Uh, so if we're sort of dividing up this organism that we're
Mhm.
envisioning into the neuron stuff and the rest of the organism, then I understand that the rest of the organism is going to benefit.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there.
And in particular, who actually benefits? Well, it'd be the genes.
Hmm.
But when I look at the neurons, I don't know who's benefiting.
I see what you're
Uh,
saying.
but I do think somebody's benefiting. And I suspect it's the memes.
Yeah.
Not that there's so obviously any memes in the head of some creature that is very primitive, but it raises a good question. If you have this early thing, like let's consider planarian, are there memes in the planarian's head? Uh, to me, sort of no, because to have memes in that head um, seems to require memory devices, and I'm not sure these. Okay, so anyway, I like your comment. As usual, I'm confused. All right, so let's go on. And by the way, this is the recent history of preens, so it's just very high level overview.
About 200,000 years ago, modern man emerged with a brain composed of hundreds of billions of neurons. The golden age of memes had arrived, and human brains would soon be filled with ideas and beliefs about religion, governance, science, morality, beauty, and many other things. Societal cultural preens would control much of our behavior, and the world would be filled with people struggling with internal conflicts and emotional turmoil. In part 2, humans, we will look more deeply into this. Less than 100 years ago, we began building digital computers. Computational devices had budded off their genetic stalks and were on their own to
Okay, so this is another pivotal event, I think, in the history of evolution. So organisms had developed proto-brains and brains uh, that they carried around in what became their heads. Yes? And so we've had for a very long time computers inside of organisms. The best computers today are inside humans, whatever best means. Okay. But when we started to build a computational device, which I think is roughly speaking ENIAC in the 1946, I think it was, then these computational devices became free of organic support. They were now things in and of themselves, right? They no longer needed organisms. Okay.
Terrenes had arrived. How will they evolve? What relationship will they have with genes and memes? How will computers affect the future of humanity? In Part 3, Computers, we will explore this further.
Okay, so there's going to be a part two. Part one was social evolution. Part two is going to be humans. Part three is going to be computers. Okay. We'll skip this. Okay, so let's go to humans.
Part 2. Humans. From the preen-theoretic point of view, humans are merely instruments for storing and serving genes, memes, and other preens. From this view, you have remarkably little to do with you. Do you think you determine what you eat, what smells good, who you are attracted to, when you cry, where your children go to school, and for whom you vote? From the preen-theoretic view, these things are determined by preens. Looking at humans as mere instruments of preens will not capture the beauty and richness of our lives. If you are on a spiritual journey searching for the meaning of life, you may not like some of the answers that preen theory provides. Nonetheless, looking at humans this way may allow us to see things about ourselves that we have overlooked in the past. Lecture 18, 2025036 Part 3. What a piece of work is a man.
Does anybody recognize that line? The title of this chapter? You don't recognize it. It's Shakespeare. Boy, our educational system is even that is too old school for you guys. Okay, yeah, it's Shakespeare. What a piece of work is a man, so noble, and I don't remember the quote. Anyway, that's where it comes from.
Each human stores a vast array of genes, memes, and other preens, and no two humans store the same set. As discussed in the selfish preen, each of the preens we store is on its own evolutionary path, trying to use us to maximize its own chances of survival. As a result, Proposition 4. Each human stands at the crossroads of many lines of evolution.
Right? So you have all sorts of preens, and they're not friends. They all have their own goal, which is their own survival. And so you are just this chaotic vessel for these various evolutions that want to use you.
Evolution. Fortunately, our genes have provided us with tools for coping. Lecture 18, 2025036 Part 4. Your hardware. Our genes have provided us with a set of actuators that allow us to act upon the physical world. They have provided legs for moving, hearts for circulating blood, and lacrimal glands for tearing. We cannot exhibit physical behavior that our actuators cannot produce. So even if you think you can fly, you can't.
Well, I've said that a number of times in the course. Yeah, right?
Can't. Though no two people are entirely the same, virtually all humans share essentially the same set of actuators, and hence essentially the same repertoire of potential physical behaviors. I strongly suspect that our genes have provided us with a set of emotions that allow us to react emotionally to the physical world. More will be said about this in emotions.
Okay, so we've discussed a little bit about that.
Emotions. Our genes have provided us with a set of sensors that monitor our internal and external environments. We have eyes for seeing and ears for hearing. We have sensors that monitor our blood sugar level and level of hydration. We have sensors that detect temperature, pressure, and taste. Virtually all humans share essentially the same set of sensors. Our genes have provided us with brains. The human brain is a computer. It is just like our commercial computers in the sense that everything that the brain can do, commercial computers can also do. This is axiomatic in the mathematical theory of computation, though at this stage in our civilization, we don't know how to build and program commercial computers well enough to actually do some of the more remarkable things brains do.
Keep in mind that a lot of this stuff was written 25 years ago or something. So it wasn't, AI hadn't arrived, for example.
Do Lenote analog devices?
So some people think that maybe analog phenomena are happening in our brain. So I'd like to get your opinions on that. Uh, are there analog circuits or devices in our brains? And would it matter?
Would it? So just a question, Professor.
Yes, John.
Can't you have analog computers?
You can. So let's look at that. Okay. So do you know any examples of analog computers?
I don't know how vacuum tubes work, but I mean, I have an example. If I print code and I myself uh, follow the instructions and write down any memory I need during the steps, then
Yes, yes.
I think that's an example.
Maybe it is. But that we'll get back to that. Hopefully, Ryan is going to bail us out and give us an
Um,
example.
okay,
Yes.
I guess a clarifying question. When you say analog, what exactly do you mean by analog? Like no electricity at all, or just no, like not relying on the digital storage of information?
I'm not sure, Ryan.
Okay,
So
because,
oh, please go
sorry,
on.
I would posit if you just mean not relying on the digital storing of information, actually all computers are analog computers because they're composed of these little like logic gate circuits
Yeah.
that just you give them electrical impulses and then they spit out electrical impulses, and nothing about that is digital because it doesn't rely on anything that's in software.
Yeah. And I think I understand that as well. Um, okay, let me try to uh, create something.
Well,
I
Professor,
believe, oh,
didn't,
yes,
didn't you make uh, some computation out of DNA?
I did. I did. So, is that analog? Okay. Uh, I don't know. I don't think it is. I think it's digital, but it could be wrong. So let me describe uh, a setting that may shed light on this, and of course, probably won't shed enough light on this. All right. So let's say I built a computer uh, like the one Babbage was trying to build back in, I think it's the late 1800s in England. Yes. And as I recall, it consisted of a bunch of gears and stuff that when you turn to crank, they do various things and, gears would spin and all this stuff would happen. And the result would be that you could use this device for a calculation. You could put in, I assume, the input as some module where you set some initial gears in there that sort of were the input. And the output could be read in another set of gears that were fixed, didn't change. And that you could use this, for example, to calculate orbits of the sun, or I don't know what he was going to do with it. I do recall that he made maybe some progress on it, but the technology at the time was such that he couldn't get it accurate enough, these gears to calculate things. Okay. Now, let's say all you had to do was crank a wheel to get this calculation done. Then what if we hooked that crank to a motor? And then it would just get done as the motor spinned. All right. Now, it would do some calculation. My question would be, was it doing any calculation that could not be done digitally? I mean, I'm not saying you can't do calculations with analog devices. I'm saying, can you calculate anything you couldn't calculate digitally? So, let me continue on my Babbage-like machine. We've hooked it to a motor, and let's say it ran a computation. It could calculate something. I mean, one computation, of course, can be calculated a lot of ways, but let's say this thing was capable of calculating a function, like maybe, factoring numbers, but maybe something that couldn't be done on a regular digital computer. That's what I'm worried about. Can it do anything that a digital computer can't? So I built this Babbage machine. I've hooked it up to a motor. I start it running. The gears are spinning around, and this thing, I can give it various inputs, and this thing will produce outputs, and it's calculating a function, inputs to outputs, that can't be calculated on a digital computer. Now, my question is, I don't think that's possible, or that's not a question, that's an assertion. I don't think that's possible. And I'll give you a reason shortly why that Babbage machine could not calculate a function that a good old-fashioned digital machine could calculate. John, please.
Yeah, so just to make sure that my understanding is correct, if I could take your description of Babbage's machine and implement it in a Turing complete programming language, like I can have objects for the gears, and I could have memory allocated for whatever memory the Babbage machine uses. Doesn't that show that that particular analog computer, whatever that can compute, digital computers also can compute? Isn't it enough
Yeah.
just to translate from one to the other?
Yeah. So I, for example, I mean, I like your example. I also have a reason, which is sort of related to your example. Okay, let's say you brought this Babbage machine and it could calculate some function that a regular old digital computer, a Turing machine, for example, could not calculate. And you're giving an argument why that can't be the case. Here's my argument why it can't be the case. Let's say I have a particular input that I'm interested in, and I set up the input module to reflect that that's the input. And I turn on this machine, but I'm filming it. That is, I'm taking a video of it. Okay. Old school. I'm taking a video of it. Yes? Now, the video is clearly only keeping a digital approximation to it. But would I not eventually be able to get to the output of the Babbage device on my video as well? And if I ran the video, I could see the calculation. And the video would only contain digital information, so many frames. Is that an argument that I could have?
I would ask, wouldn't you? A computer works on infinite inputs, right? So
It can work on infinite inputs. It usually doesn't, but one
Right.
could talk about that. Yeah.
Right, right. But I'm not sure if you're relying on having filmed Babbage's machine over the set of all inputs, which is potentially so that would maybe be a problem.
Well, I don't think it would be, because I think Babbage machine, we're expecting it to run on infinitely many finite inputs.
Right.
Okay. And we could film for any particular input that we cared about the setup. We could watch it run and find the answer. And we could watch it on a video. And that video we would recognize only had, a finite amount of digital information in it. And we could increase the resolution of that video. We could slice it into finer time segments, and we could have higher resolution images. And I sort of suspect that eventually that video would I don't know. Okay. So, but these are the kind of issues. I'm under the impression that analog devices can't compute any function that a digital device can't compute. Okay, but yeah, I don't think we resolved it finally to my satisfaction, but it's good discussion.
Sorry to interrupt,
Ron?
but I think another interesting threshold would be if analog computers are in any way more efficient than digital computers. If they can, if they're faster.
Right. Let's see. Yes, and I think they can appear to be faster, but they're not actually. Here's an old thing that I remember. Let's see. Okay, so let's say you guys know the shortest path. What's a good example of what I'm talking about? See, we sometimes think that if I give you a problem, you can just look at it and get the answer. And sometimes you can do that. And that makes people think that these processes are much faster than computers because I could just look at this. Like I once did a very small Hamiltonian path problem. This had to do with the DNA computing. And anybody could look at the graph that I found the Hamiltonian path on. Anyone could look at it and easily see that there was a Hamiltonian path, and they could look at it because it was a very small graph. And so they think, well, that's an easy problem. But your eyes stop working to help you solve the problem. Your eyes are very parallel devices that worked very well in this case. Your eyes would do you no good if instead of like 6 nodes in the graph, there were 60 trillion nodes in the graph. Your eyes wouldn't be helpful. So anyway, for whatever that's worth, we shall move on.
Virtually all humans share essentially the same computer brains. As an aside, consider the following. By reasoning, I understand computation. Thomas Hobbes. De Corpore, 1655.
So Hobbes is this very famous philosopher. And 1655, he says this, by reasoning, he's wondering what it is that gives humans reason. And he says, by reasoning, I understand computation. And if you look at more of what he said at that time, he really was basically understood what he was saying. He's basically saying that it's just some computational device in our heads that allow us to reason. And I found that remarkable.
It is remarkable that in 1655, just 3 years after Galileo's death and 3 decades before Newton's Principia, Hobbes apparently perceived a connection between brains and computers. But without our modern understanding of computation, Hobbes could not see the implications of his insight, including the limitations on human reasoning that computation imposes.
But still, Hobbes is impressive.
Because our brains are computers, the laws that govern computing must also govern our brains. Fortunately, we know a great deal about these laws. We can thank some great mathematicians, starting in the 1930s with Gödel and Turing, for this knowledge. We will have more to say about computers in Part 3, Computers. So, here we are, beings with actuators, sensors, and computer brains. We are robots. Robots? Many of us do not see ourselves as robots. We are something fundamentally different. We are humans. We are special. We think, we love, we create, we do amazing things. Nonetheless, in Preen theory, you are a robot, who may not believe you are a robot. Preen theory provides a stark, reductionist view of reality in which humans are mere instruments. As Shakespeare wrote, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player, that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Well, I would normally have assumed you guys have encountered this quote sometime in your life, but based on your performance on what a piece of work is a man, I'm not so sure. This is a very famous other quote from Shakespeare. And he's describing basically what life is to humans. Yes. I'll go through it again here.
Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player, that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Preen theory.
Okay, so to me, a beautiful quote, but
Preen theory tells us the purpose of our performance.
So it's saying the reason we're, walking on the stage full of sound and fury is because the preens are making us do it. All right. And then two robots. Okay. So continuing here. Maybe not continuing here. I'll tell you what. Let's take our break now. We'll meet at 3, and then we'll turn to the inquiries part of this book and look at the question of it's alive and discuss that. Okay, guys, so I will see you in 10 minutes. Hello. Hi, Isabel. Okay. Hello, Ryan. Uh, so now we're going to begin It's Alive. Okay, so
It's alive. The recent history of preens began with the emergence of self-replicating molecules billions of years ago. Was this the beginning of life on Earth?
so that's the question. Um, when did life begin on Earth? Uh, and I'd like to have a little discussion before we deal. Okay. And so when do you think life began on Earth? That is, what kind of event? Basically, this comes down to what does it mean to be living? What alive? Yes. By the way, do you understand why I chose this title?
That's
Okay,
Frankenstein.
that's Frankenstein. Yes. Which, by the way, I recently listened to Frankenstein by uh, Shelley. What's her name?
Mary Shelley.
Yes, yes, that's it. Thanks. Okay. Anyway, so what does it mean to be alive? Any guesses? Um, Presumably, or perhaps you think that you and I and the other members of our chat are alive. Okay. Uh, and bacteria, I guess you think are alive. And many people sort of wonder whether viruses are alive. Yes. So what's your impression? Are viruses alive? Okay. Mm.
Why? So if like bacteria are alive, then why are viruses not alive? I forget. I remember this discussion from like
The,
biology.
the, yes, yes. Here's a standard reason why ones might say they're not alive. Um, is that if you go down to bacteria, all by themselves, it appears, at least it appears that all by themselves, they can produce new copies of themselves. But that's not true of a virus. Like COVID, if you put it in some salty water with a lot of sugar and all the usual junk that would not reproduce itself, it needs a host to reproduce. Okay, so that's why some people wonder whether it's alive or not. Okay. Um, so what about those self-replicating molecules? Are they alive?
Like,
Anybody?
oh,
Yes, Isabel, please.
like with this definition, which seems to be self-replication, I think they are alive.
Oh, okay. Yes, and that's part of the question. You know, the people who opt to think that in their view, viruses aren't alive, certainly aren't going to think that these self-replicating molecules were alive. Yes. All right. So somebody had a question or remark. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe I
I had
missed.
a hand up.
Ah, Julian.
Well, I was going off what you said earlier that viruses do need a host, but I was
Yeah.
thinking there's plenty of living things on Earth that if when you put them in a different environment, they die. And even humans are like that. If you put a human on Mercury, they wouldn't last. So I guess
Mhm.
is Earth a host? Does a host need to be a living thing? Does that qualify as life? or a lack of life if it needs another living thing, and Earth, I guess, isn't a living thing, but it's full of living things, and we need living things to live on Earth, right?
I think that's a good observation, Julian. And uh, yeah, so maybe viruses should be considered to be living. Okay. Maybe they shouldn't. All right. Um, so I think what we have is that at least acknowledge that where you draw the line between living and non-living is not clear. And people draw it at various places. But I want to um, go on with what might be alive.
That depends on your definition of life. But independent of your definition, it does seem likely that those early self-replicating molecules were engaged in an evolutionary struggle that has continued through time and has become the struggle in which all living things are now engaged.
Right? That is, these self-replicating molecules would have been struggling to survive. Yes? You good with that? And we would have seen evolution and they would have been struggling and various new species would arise and all like that. So there's an evolutionary struggle that is going on once self-replicating molecules are around. I'm not saying that whether they're alive or not, but there's a struggle, and I believe that's the same struggle that has continued through time and in which we are engaged today. All right. So with that sort of hypothesis,
But did this evolutionary struggle itself begin with self-replicating molecules?
so did it? I mean, if I'm going to say that the self-replicating molecules were involved in an evolutionary struggle, which is the same struggle that we're now engaged in, then did it begin with self-replicating molecules? Were they the first things that started to struggle um, uh, to survive? Any thoughts on that, Ryan?
I mean, the first thought in my mind when you say like the first struggle to survive would be like cosmology, like different galaxies and clusters of galaxies, etc.
That's interesting. Okay, let's explore that. Um, is there an evolutionary struggle going on in the
Um,
universe, say in the first, you know, let's say a couple of million years before there's planets and stuff apparently? Is there? Like one view, and probably not a very good view because I'm not a cosmologist, is that there's this Big Bang and that there's all this energy uh, that is appears and that it's so hot in what the universe is at the time, because only a small object at the time. It's so hot that there's no such thing as a molecule. Molecules, even quarks, I guess, can't consolidate. Though I'm not sure hot describes it. Anyway, there is this thing, right? And Ryan, yes, please.
oh, I was gonna say, you asked earlier if there was such a an evolutionary struggle that early. The baryons wound up almost completely obliterating the non-baryons.
Okay, so this is something that I only know the edge of this. Uh, I believe, tell me that I'm wrong, because I probably am, that there's two classes of quarks. The baryons and the not baryons. Is that right? Or is that
I don't know if those are considered quarks or not. I don't know. I took like a cosmology course and I'm like struggling to remember anything, but there definitely was like in the first, I think it was like 150,000 years of the universe, there was like a struggle between two different like classes of matter, and actually matter and antimatter, like
yes,
matter
now
beat
that
out antimatter, definitely. Um,
yeah, now uh, I'm sorry, please go on, Ryan.
and now that I think about it, I'm not actually sure. Were the baryons the sort of normal matter, the ones that interact with light, or did we have a different name for that? Because I think actually dark matter, I guess, won the evolutionary struggle because most of the universe seems to be dark matter,
Yeah, so okay. Uh,
which I
I
think is non-baryonic.
okay. And like just a remark on the particle antiparticle. At least one would think a priori that you'd have just as many electrons in the universe as you'd have positrons. But as far as we can observe of our universe, we're not seeing it. I'm not sure how you see these things. Okay, but we're not seeing it. So physicists have of course considered this an issue, and they've come up with uh, some theories of why this has happened. And this, I think, has to do with symmetry breaking, and I recall various things. Now, uh, one, assuming that the physicists are right, the antiparticles and the particles, perhaps we could use the baryons and non-baryons, but we're engaged in some kind of struggle, presumably. And presumably the particles won, yes. But I'm not sure that has all the hallmarks of being alive. For example, I don't know that uh, electrons self-replicate. Uh, that's one thing I don't know that they do. Um, Another thing is electrons catcher. Okay. Uh, Wait, I know what. Okay. John, maybe you can enlighten us on this.
Maybe I can confuse myself some more.
Yes, please. That's always good.
Right. So I was thinking about this tangentially when I was thinking about the wave example that I brought up
Mhm.
last time. I think with physical systems, I mean, there are cases, if you have like a dynamical system, like a chaotic dynamical system,
Yes.
it can evolve sometimes into different steady states, right?
Yes.
Which is I think is what we're talking about now. But that sense of evolve is not the sense that we've been using in Preen theory, because I think the sense in Preen theory, we always mean some, like, I think we always need replication, like you said, mutation, and natural selection. So if it's only like the laws of physics and the equations they can resolve into, I don't know, finite different number of steady states, I don't think that counts as evolution. The fact that the universe unfolded in one of such steady states, I don't think they were like competing to survive, in the sense that when we're talking about Preen theory, we mean competition for survival.
I see. I see. So, also, you seem to have enlightened me on I guess how physicists may be explaining these asymmetries, for example, between matter and antimatter. Um, you're suggesting it's a dynamical system that has many steady states, and
With
uh,
yeah,
and
sorry, no, yeah, with just to highlight, with a high degree of speculation. I'm not a physicist. I like the math behind dynamical systems, but I can't. I'm not an authority on the physics part.
okay, but it's a nice image for me because I, like you, don't understand the physics, but I do have a sense of the dynamical systems. So maybe that is a way to resolve this matter antimatter thing. Ryan?
Well, I kind of agree that we probably shouldn't be considering like the baryons and the non-baryons to be like alive or likewise matter and antimatter. Um, I have to kind of disagree with at least part of John's statement, which was I'm not completely convinced that there's much of a difference between this kind of evolution and what we're seeing on Earth, because in a sense, the Earth is a very, very, very chaotic system. And for all we know, there is a steady state, and we've just never reached it.
Um,
And there are probably many steady states. One of them is the complete annihilation of all life on Earth.
yeah, well, I mean, if there is a steady state, I mean, the Earth is an open system in the sense of chemistry, and it's a system in which there's a flow of energy into the system. And as a result of that, the system can sort of slow down or reverse entropy. And that seems to be part of what gives rise to life. So that's one feature of something going on. I don't know what exactly that means. So that's just another piece of information to help us be baffled. Okay, Isabel, clear this up for us.
Well, I thought like in terms of dynamical systems, I mean, because this is like what I'm like studying right now. Like, I thought like equilibrium in general kind of means death. Like, so like any kind of when you reach like a steady state, like true steady state, that's like death. I thought like so when it comes to evolution, it always happens at the edge of chaos, right? Like,
Yeah, yes. Well, I don't think at the edge of chaos necessarily, but I do subscribe to the importance of what you just said, that there is this notion that when the universe, the second law of thermodynamics, that entropy in the universe is always, increasing. And even though locally it can actually decrease if you have a flow of energy into that system, in the end, it's all going to just become the gray, whatever you call it. All right. And then we will have reached equilibrium, in which case I also see that as death, right? So, for example, I saw this video, not that the notion that you're talking about of uh, reaching equilibrium is death, uh, a video that illustrated that very well. It showed just a bacterium, and you watched it die. Okay. And what happened is it sort of its membrane broke open, and just everything that was inside sort of oozed to the outside. And it had done, it had lower entropy than its surroundings inside that cell until the break happened, in which case it returned to equilibrium with its surroundings. And that's what its death was. So, yes. And as I recall, the people who made that video said, that's what death is. Okay. And by the way, Schrodinger, he of the cat in the equation, also had a definition of life, I think.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
I think so. It'd be nice to look at what Schrodinger said about life. I suppose we could do that. Or do we want to do that now? All right. Schrodinger's. Well, let me see if I can find it and share it with you. I'll do it chat GTP or something. Okay. Schrodinger definition of life. Okay. So I did find something and I will share that with you guys. Right. So Edwin Schrodinger, in his 1944 book, What is Life, defined life from a physicist's perspective. He proposed that life is characterized by the ability to resist entropy. So that's what we're talking about, disorder, by maintaining order and organization. Unlike inanimate matter, living organisms do this by extracting and processing negative entropy, free energy, from their environment. Essentially, Schrodinger's viewed life as an open system that avoids thermodynamic equilibrium. Okay, an open system. Okay, which usually leads to decay and death by continuously importing energy and expelling disorder. His ideas influenced the development of molecular biology, particularly the discovery of DNA as the carrier of genetic information. I don't see how that influence would have happened, but I do understand Schrodinger's comments, and I think it's what we've been talking about here. Yes? Okay. Yeah. John, please.
Yeah, just to contribute two nice examples of this open system idea. So one is, if you think of a bathtub, when when it's not when the hole is not closed, right? The water flows down and forms a whirlpool,
Yes.
which is there's high content of information there. The molecules of water are not in some random arbitrary arrangement. They are in a very depth arrangement. So it's not high entropy, it's low entropy. And to make a contrast with that, if you think of when you drop ink in a bottle of water, then initially you will see like swirls, which are also it's a very information rich state.
Yes.
Since it's a closed system, different than the whirlpool, with the passage of time, the ink will just sort of occupy the space of the rest of the container, and you have this high entropy state. So I think I don't know. I like these examples. They're not from me. They're from a book I read that talks about this stuff and actually mentions Schrodinger's definition of life as well.
Ah,
But I thought that they are helpful images, at least to me.
yes, yes. And there's other examples that I've seen of that, like a fountain that the water may take a certain shape is only there because there's this flow of in this. Okay.
Right. And then, sorry, and then there were some other ideas. Then since you have information in these systems,
Oh yes, I meant to remark on that. Please keep going.
I think that's very important as well because our idea of preens had to do with information, and so and and we have this idea that information can be computed on, right? So maybe there's a link between these purely physical systems and then the life systems we're talking about, somewhere there in between.
Yes, you've made an important connection that has been made before. I'm not sure it's a connection between life and preens and how all that works, but it is the case that there's a notion of entropy in information theory, the mathematical theory, and it satisfies what look like the same sort of equations that entropy satisfies in physics. And so I've seen several uh, uh, scientists and or mathematicians and or physicists who contemplate what is the relationship between this entropy in information theory and this entropy in physics. And it's a very interesting question, and I don't know the answer to it. I'd be delighted if preens are the way you reconcile these things, but I don't know that that's actually the case. But yes, that's another important thing that I don't understand, like so many others. Okay, Nathan.
Yes, I was thinking about like fire and whether that's alive because
Mm.
I feel like it's weird because like first of all it's kind of hard to define like what is fire. It's not like necessarily like I guess there is mass and there's energy, but it because like it consumes its resources, but then like how would it uh store information?
Okay, so we're thinking of like a log that's on fire or something like that. Uh, so you got this thing. Is there any information? What's going on is, at least in my mind, is a fire is a manifestation of increasing equilibrium, increasing um, entropy. That is, when you just had this, let's say the piece of paper, uh, it was fairly well organized. When you burned it, it became very disorganized. And because it had been organized before you lit it on fire, uh, and now it became highly disorganized, that that drop in entropy or increase in entropy is an uh, is a form of energy that we see as fire, I guess. It's goes energy has to be released now. So when the energy was sort of in the paper, wasn't on fire and it was very organized when it got released. Okay, now, okay, so here's a question. What if I had written, let's say, what a piece of work is a man on that piece of paper? For those of you who aren't familiar, that's Shakespeare. Just a cheap shot at you guys. Okay. And then I light it on fire. So presumably we perceived that there was information on that piece of paper, and now I lit it on fire. I assume the information that we saw in the quote has gone away. So do we learn anything about the physics of entropy and the physics and the entropy of information theory by that example?
I mean, I think life and like I guess preens in general like destroy information of the preens that they consume. Like if I was to kill a chicken and then eat it, I will be destroying the information of that chicken's. I think chickens have memories. So I'd be destroying information to sustain myself.
Yes, I think that's an example of that sort of thing, but you would have destroyed the information. But even if you first, forgive the analogy, cut off the chicken's head, where presumably it has some information in it, and just eaten the chicken, you would have acquired something physically, some energy. Is there really a difference because there was something in the head? Now this gets us to a lot of things, by the way, um, which we won't resolve, but is all part of this mystery. Um, for example, um, if you look at I guess statistical mechanics, you you learn to think of entropy as a statistical thing involving organized or disorganizing, for example, red and blue balls in a vessel. Okay, and you end up with, I guess, a unit of um, of energy which is involves Boltzmann's constant. Okay, and I think that implies that there's a certain minimal amount of energy to produce a change in a system. You can't produce a change in a system without using this small amount of memory. So somebody, has to be a better uh, statistical mechanics person than me. But I think there's this minimal use of energy. And that in turn connected to a question that arose, which was, what's the minimum cost in energy that you need to carry out a computation? That is, we always carry out computations, but if we use some clunky, or like if we used a well, if you use some 1940s computer to calculate whether a number is prime, some number, it's going to take you a lot more energy than if you used with the same number a modern computer. Okay. So the question was asked, what's the minimum amount of energy you need to carry out a computation? And the answer, which was provided by a colleague of mine who was a physicist named Charles Bennett, was that you need zero energy to carry out a computation. Okay. However, if you want to read the answer to that computation, that's going to cost you. And And the minimum cost of reading one bit of information from a computation was this log base 2 of, maybe it was Schrodinger's constant or something, but it was a number, some real number. Okay, so so I think in Babbage's work, not Babbage, Charles Bennett's work, it says a lot about the nature of information in a computer and what it means in physics. Uh, uh, Charles also was one of the first guys to play with quantum computation a lot. And he also runs these experiments, like how to make a channel that you communicate along, and such that if anybody tampers with the channel, it's detected. So sort of as a security thing. And he also sometimes comes up because uh, I think he's demonstrated that teleportation is possible. I mean, actually carried out experiments and stuff like that. All right. At any rate, Isabel, please.
Yeah, I was curious, like, did he, because like, because you said that he said, to calculate, I mean, to compute, like, you don't use any energy. Is it because like he thought of like it almost as like a probabilistic way, like kind of like in the way quantum mechanics is like kind of using like,
No, I don't think it's quantum mechanical. Here's what I think it is that you, if you allow your computation to take place and I'll say it in a way you'll probably appreciate, and you destroy no information, and you can do that. That is, when you go through an AND gate, you also record what went into the AND gate, and you keep that in memory. That basically you can create reversible computing machines. That is, you don't lose any information during the computation, and so they can run forward or backward. Okay. And therefore, your computation ends up being sort of a random walk, but it's using no energy. This is what Charles did, and he actually knows physics. And it uses no energy. But of course, that means it'll only be in its final state sort of occasionally, because it may run back to the start and forward. It's doing a random walk. But if you want to actually find out what the answer was when it got to the end, that's going to cost you energy. But the computation can take place. So look, you're a better physicist than I am, Isabel. So go read what Charles said.
yeah, that's really fascinating because it's like it's almost like you like replicate like a quantum-like system, but in an entirely classical way. That's really cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it was important, of course, to keep reversibility
Yeah.
because that meant, yeah. So, you know, that's what he's talking about. Okay, Nathan, please.
Yes, I guess this is uh so I was wondering, like, for example, gold box conjecture. It's
Yeah.
like it's either true or false, so it would just be one bit of information to read. So is this like, I guess, saying that like theoretically it's possible for some society to solve the gold box conjecture using only the amount of energy it takes to read one bit? Because I feel like that's unrealistic, but
Yeah, but
I
well,
don't know.
wait a minute. Uh, I don't think we want to conflate a proof with a computation unless we understand how we're doing it. All right. So uh, one can imagine that there's a proof out there someplace that Goldbach's conjecture is, let's just choose true. Let's assume it's actually true. And let's also assume it's not one of these things that's independent of Zermelo-Fraenkel axioms and things. Let's assume it's true. Then if it's true, in fact, let's go further. Let's assume it's provable. Those aren't the same things, actually. Let's assume it's provable. Nobody knows the proof so far, but let's assume you can prove it's actually true. Okay, so if you could prove it was true, then there could be a computer that you give Goldbach's conjecture to, and it starts to, for example, go through all possible proofs from Zermelo-Fraenkel, in some orderly fashion, until it stumbles across this thing. And then it gives you the answer, yes, this thing being the proof that the answer is yes. And then it sets a bit to 1. So could that computation be done with 0 energy? The answer is yes. Okay. And but of course, if you had such a device and you open it, that is, you look at it at a particular time t, you're very unlikely to capture that device at the very end of the computation because it's random walking along this long thing. And I suppose if you want to be able to capture it, you got to keep looking at it a number of times, and eventually, then you have to pay a cost in energy. I don't know how it works in detail, but that's some of the background. Okay, John?
Yeah, just wanted to point out one thing that was very confusing for me when I was thinking about the connection between Boltzmann's entropy and Shannon's entropy.
Yes.
So when you're talking about the physics, you're always thinking about arrangement of physical objects. So the red and the blue balls, if you think of them in a box, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about all blue balls are to the right and then all red balls are to the left.
Yes.
And then you think about how would you link that to Shannon's idea of information, which is the bits required to communicate that state, right? So
yes, that's very good. Yeah.
so I claim that when you communicate a very ordered state, such as all blue balls to the right and all red balls to the left, you need very few bits.
Yes, that
So
seems right.
we tend to think of the very ordered and very information-rich physical arrangement as something that requires very few bits. While if you had a very a box that was the red and blue balls were totally mixed, you would require a lot of bits to describe that configuration.
Yes.
Per Shannon's definition of information. So there's it's almost like few bits mean more information when you're talking about the physics part, and that was very counterintuitive for me.
Okay. Yes. I like that connection. Now that you've said it, I've seen people make that kind of connection before, but I think it's a very good one. Yes. Okay. So let me do a little bit of detour here. The okay, so this relates to it. So Kolmogorov was the first one to say, well, How much information is there in a string of bits? Like I give you some string of bits. Let's say it's 1,000,000 long. Here it is. And we want to know how much information there is in. And so Kolmogorov said, well, the answer is let's build a Turing machine that will, when given a blank tape as input, end up writing that number on the tape as output. Now, we're not doing any zero energy thing here. We're just normal Turing machine stuff. And he said the amount of information in the string that we started with is now the size of the program, the smallest program you could write that would output the string in question from a blank starting point. Yes? So, for example, if I give you 50 or 500,000 ones followed by 500,000 zeros, then you can write a very small program, right? Like it could just be a for loop for I equals 1 to blah, 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 print 1, and then do it again for zeros. Yes? Very small. Okay. Then Kolmogorov would say it doesn't have very big Kolmogorov. Pardon me, complexity. Yes? And it's a very nice idea. But, okay, it's a very nice idea that this is the amount of information in a string of zeros and ones. Just combinatorial reasoning will tell you that for most strings that are out there, say of 1,000,000 bits, they're not compressible hardly at all. And this is just a pigeonhole principle issue. Okay. So, but some are. Now, a young mathematician at MIT back in the 70s explored Kolmogorov's ideas, but with a twist, and wanted to take complexity theory into account. That is, there are two parameters we might assign to a computer that outputs the string in question. Not just the size of the program that was used, but we might also be concerned with the number of steps it took. Yes. So, for example, we believe that if I give you a very large prime, no, a large number, and let's say it's the product of two large primes, then according to, and now I ask you to factor it. And so the input is that number and the output is the prime factorization, two numbers. Then in Kolmogorov's world, the unfactored number and the factored number have the same Kolmogorov complexity because a very small program can factor numbers. Now, I haven't filled in the details of why that's the case, but both the unfactored and the factored number would have the same Kolmogorov complexity. But we know that, in fact, or we suspect, that it takes an exponential time to get from one to the other, right? And that should be part of our consideration on these notions and like that. So, yeah, and that was me. Yeah. And there's a paper out there someplace that talks about this. Okay, so well, this was a fun discussion. I think we touched on a few important issues, but we never got into the chapter It's Alive, and we'll do that next time. Okay? So be well and see you later.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.